Well, welcome to the podcast, Kyle. I am really looking forward to having this conversation with you. Just prior to us getting started, we were saying that, we're very complementary, the things that we teach. And so I think this will be a great conversation.
I'm so excited to be here, Catherine. It's so good to meet you just a few days ago and connect. And now we're already creating, which is really some of the real magic of content and having a great platform that I just am basking in right now.
That's it. We're creating some magic here on the podcast, and there might be a story or two. We'll see. But why don't we start with telling the audience just a little bit about who you are, what you do, who you help, how you help them, all the good stuff.
Absolutely. There's many different ways that I have practiced my craft, but I would say I'm a storytelling strategist. I listen very carefully to experts who are probably a little bit too smart for their own good. They have so many good ideas and they just kind of get jammed, or they just want to say them all. And it just kind of comes out cluttered in a way. And I've practiced stories by listening to hundreds and thousands of people just like this, and just applied the same simple frameworks to what I hear, and collecting little details here and there, and then with them creating stories that they can put into use in presentations, in sales calls. These stories also, when you start to get more clear on who you are and what you're doing, it actually starts to change who you are and how you show up, and how you resonate with people, and so magical different things start to happen. And when you want to become more visible, oftentimes the things that hold us back are stories about why we shouldn't be, or why we should be hiding. And I've had plenty of those that I have faced myself. And so through the many different aspects of storytelling, I work to help experts really achieve their greatness and be in their zone of genius, and make sure that sharing their story and their vision is the most valuable thing in their business.
Oh, I love that. I love all of that. It's so important, so needed what you do. And yeah, we do serve a very similar audience indeed. And I'd be curious to know from you, because I know from my own perspective of why I do what I do. Is that something that you struggled with in communicating your own stories in your business as well? Or like, how did this evolve?
There's two sides to the story. I can think of lots of different ways where I've always been an expressive person, and I think doing this work is an iteration of the musician that I was when I was 19, 20, singer songwriter, playing in a band. I remember in those days feeling ashamed of my voice in a way, because I wanted to sing higher, and I just had a deep voice, and I was like ashamed that I wanted to try and hit the higher notes. But yeah, through I think I started learning about how to create emotional experiences by really thinking about how to craft a lyrics and weaving those in with song and music and rhythm. And I started finding that again through many different outlets. And though I have been a reasonably prolific writer and creator over the last 10 years, I've done a lot of blogging and content marketing. I've written a lot of books. I've always also struggled, even to this day, thinking like, well, my ideas are good or different. I can listen to somebody and have total fascination and just be like, the stars are yours, and then I'm like, I mean, it's not, it's kind of good. And I face it all of the time still to this day. But it's something that I understand and really feel and work with and empathize. And when it lights me up so much to see when people can relax into their creativity and see their imagination and feel a connection with their stories and their purpose again, because that's what I really want for me, and to feel for me in a lot of ways. And so yeah, I guess that's one facet of it.
I love that. I love how you come from a musical background and you talk about the rhythm and, you know, the musicality of storytelling is so important and has shaped your probably your unique take on storytelling as well. So, I'm curious with storytelling because, you know, it's always fascinated me. Like, I understand the concept of storytelling, but then I think where I've gotten confused in the past and probably some of my listeners and your audience as well is, you know, for the expert, how do how, how do you tell a good story? How do you know what a good story is to tell?
Yeah, there's a lot of great nuance to this. The way I like to think of storytelling is it's like a martial art. There's not just one amazing roundhouse kick that's going to win every martial arts contest every time. And in fact, the practice of certain moves over time and certain disciplines allows a martial artist to respond in ways without having to think, but it's efficient and it's trained in. In just the same way, there are frameworks, both big in stories and kind of arcing through different presentations or short forms of content, but there's different ways that we can persuade them with little frameworks that add up to little decisions that add up to a big choice or leading somewhere. And many of these different stories, once we know just what to do when, we can start to use them naturally without having a script. But one of the most common and well recognized of these stories is an origin story. I've called it an authority story as well. And a lot of times it starts out with something like, here's how I got into the business. It starts with a pain point of, this is when things turned around, and this is when I decided something needed to be better. And these are very versatile, very useful, and usually the first thing that people want to figure out as maybe their first karate chop in their storytelling martial art.
Okay. Yeah. So the origin story, that's right. I'm familiar with the origin story, but here's where it always kind of like, I always wonder, it's like, aside from the origin story, are there other key stories that you should have, let's say, in a sales presentation or it just maybe even just your bag of tricks? Like, aside from the origin story, are there other stories that as experts we should have?
I'm so excited for this question
I'm
because
glad.
it's just the worst thing when somebody and they get their origin story and they light up, and then there's like so many different possibilities once you have that figured out. But most people, once they have that figured out, they just kind of they leave and they think that they're all good. And so I'm so excited for a question like this, and there are many different kinds of stories. One of the best ones is stories that you can use actually while you're teaching. The origin story is a different energy, it's a different vibration than when you're teaching. This is the origin story's purpose is trust me enough to listen to my teaching. And if we can achieve that, then we can start teaching. And our goal in teaching is not teaching people how to do something. And I know you're all very good at that. Everybody is incredibly good at that. And we can teach people how to do things from the stage. But instead, it's thinking about what their belief systems keeping them from being successful are, and how do we teach to open them up? And one of the best ways to do this is to have a story about a client that looks just like the particular audience and maybe fits in with this teaching point. Hey, this thing couldn't work for me, or I have this special problem. How could this help? And instead of just talking about solving a problem or how to do something, you talk about how you worked with this client and how you provided just a little shift for them, and then talk to them or talk about them and make them the hero of the story, how they grew their business, how they became successful, how they developed. And this is really good for overcoming objections. And it's fun to intellectualize it, but I would love to give it just like a quick story sample that can help us feel this.
Let's do it.
Okay. So one of my favorite ones is this guy by the name of Dr. Greg Eckel. And he was working with me to put on a summit. He wanted to have some good stories for his online summit called the Parkinson's Solutions Summit, because he wanted to help people with his online service. This was during the pandemic when a lot of brick and mortar places were being closed down. And so one of the biggest objections that somebody with Parkinson's or neurodegenerative disease would have is they've probably visited a traditional doctor, probably have been seeing them for years, and their doctor's been telling them that they have no other options. Keep taking the pills and come back so I can tell you you're getting worse. And anybody who truly believes that, there's no amount of teaching that Dr. Greg is going to be able to do to overcome that without being able to speak to that directly. And so we needed to craft a story during this presentation to address just that. And so I'm gonna be Greg now. One of my clients, Bill, and of course we changed his name for privacy, came into my office after being tired of being told he was just getting worse after every single doctor's visit, that he had no other options. Well, I said, Bill, there might be a few different things happening here, and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper than the traditional doctor had. I did different labs and tests and found out that heavy metal toxicity was behind a lot of the symptoms he was facing, not Parkinson's disease. And so here's what we had to do instead. And I'm going to spare you all the technical bits of that, but this is where you would teach your amazing stuff. And then Bill left my clinic feeling much more empowered and in control of his options for his health and his quality of life. And so having a simple story like this, then inserting your teaching, this helps you in so many different ways. One, it allows a client to kind of take a walk in the shoes of a client you helped and get the experience and like feel the opening up for them. And this is talking about how you're working with people, how you're serving people, the results you're getting in a way that if we were to talk about Bill when it was like, and it's time to sign up for our $20,000, I'm not sure, that's not exactly his price. I'm just saying things. But anyway, if you're for however this big program now, and this guy, we got great results for him, people are skeptical. But you can give them that same information, and if you can do it in a way that's teaching, that's helpful for them, that's oriented towards overcoming beliefs and not just teaching them how to do things, which overwhelms people, it discourages people, and it leaves people in the same rut that they still are. So one of these stories, or having a story for each of your key objections that your clients have, is an incredibly useful repertoire of stories to develop. And once you start to practice them, you can just naturally recall them. I've been able to practice some of my other clients' stories too, because it's fun to recall them and to be somebody else for a second. Maybe that's, I entertain myself with it too.
Hey, you're half a step away from becoming an actor.
Half a step away. That's true. That's interesting.
I got you thinking on that one.
Yeah, I guess I thought it does make sense in a lot of ways. And even with like using a script or using to get into the feeling of a person. And it's a very similar way to, I guess it's a process to how I actually pull out stories from a lot of people, like to come up with an origin story or an objection. A lot of the times we'll start with like, what's the biggest pain point? What's the biggest problem that your client's facing? What does it feel like? What are they really afraid of? What's going to happen with their families? And we start writing it out. And I have them read it out loud. I read it out loud with them. And I'm like, your job is to just feel this. Okay. And they're like, okay, ugh, this feels really gross. And then I say, when have you felt like this before? And stories appear. They say, oh man, I haven't thought about a story like this in a long time. And we use the emotional compass just like you would for a script, and kind of guide people into feelings and moments, and we kind of like put them into a moment and put them into character and put them into a scene that really resonates with them. And it's been a really powerful process.
Oh, wow. I love that. That's right up my alley. And emotion is key to telling a great story and to getting your audience to feel for you, to feel with you throughout the story. So that's interesting when you say like there could be a story for each objection. So let's say we're doing a sales presentation, webinar, or something like that, and you've got different objections that you're busting. You've got your origin story. I mean, how many stories could you possibly have?
That's a great question. In my most basic of formats, I like to prepare people for about a 45-minute keynote speech. With that, that's something that you can be flexible with. You could trim it down to a half an hour or less. You could probably expand it a little bit. But if you have the stories and content able with that, then you should be versatilely equipped and prepared to go on podcasts, to get on summits, to do a lot of different things and hopefully attract some clients with your business. So more or less, how many stories would I include in that? In a baseline, we would have an origin story. I like to have 3 really good teaching points that address the objections. So I would probably just have 2 client stories, maybe 3, but you have 3 teaching points. But it starts to get a little too obvious if you have 3 client stories and 3 teaching points. They start to catch on. So do one in the first teaching point and one in the third. And then there's a final one that I like called an aligned ending story, which is a story that you use at the end. So this is after you've given your call to action, you've presented your offer in an amazing way, and you've inspired the people to move forward with your awesome offer. And then you say, I'm going to leave you with this, because you don't just want to say, buy my thing, and then, or like sign up now, and then be like, okay. It's just kind of awkward. So you give the good call to action, the tactical part, and then you want to leave them with a story that has nothing to do with business or what you've been talking about. It's very innocent and mundane, but it takes us to the same, it has an emotional parallel with it has the same moral that we want them to leave with. These ones catch the audience by surprise. They feel good, and they leave people with that end of the, like that feeling that you get at the end of a movie. And you're like, oh, that was a good one. Dang. That's what we want at the end of our 45 minutes. So there's a couple of different basic frameworks. There's the hire a guide. This one's usually one of my favorites, the hire a guide. There is the change the status quo, or try something different. And then there's also like the take action now. So I'll give an example of just the hire a guide. This is also one of my favorite ones ever to tell. And it was working with a financial planner. And we needed something to close out like a 90-minute presentation on retirement that he was giving. And so, yeah, I'm going to be, my name is Bob, and pretend you've just been listening to retirement stuff for 90 minutes. All right, everybody, I'm going to leave you with this. You know, a few weeks ago, I walked into the kitchen and my wife was in there and she said, Bob, the dishwasher is broken. Will you call a repairman to get the dishwasher fixed? And I said, honey, I'm a financial planner. I'm a smart man. I'm going to fix that dishwasher myself. And with the money I save, I'm going to take you out to dinner. How does that sound? She shakes her head, narrows her eyes, waves me off. Good enough for me. I open up my laptop and search dishwasher repair on YouTube and open up the dishwasher. I get to work. I see the parts and pieces and I move them around. Everything's looking good except for this one back here. And I reach back and I try and get it and it's just not, and snap. And now it's really broken. I peek over the counter hoping my wife isn't there anymore. And she's still there. She has seen the whole thing. She's shaking her head. She hands me the phone and the repairman's already dialed. I call the repairman and bring him over. And then he gets over, takes a look at my dishwasher, sees the part I broke and replaces it, closes the dishwasher, says, Bob, you're good to go. And I say, wait, repairman, the dishwasher was broken before I broke it. Did you fix that too? And he said, Bob, you were just putting too much soap into the dishwasher. And so now we've arrived at a moral of a story. Oh, and so now we are hit with the moral of the story and this realization, oh my goodness, this is just like this moment. So it sounds like this. You know, it was on that day that I learned how important it was to hire an expert, someone who fixes dishwashers every day to help me out. So that was my first time, and that was my last time I would ever need to try doing that. And you know, the funny thing is, if I just would have called the repairman in the first place, like my wife had suggested, I probably could have saved enough money not having to hire the repairman to take her out to dinner because he just would have told me I was putting too much soap into the dishwasher. You know, all of you out there, you're only going to be planning your retirements once in your life. And how much more important of a decision is that? You see, I help people plan their retirements every day. And just like one phone call could have saved me so much and taken me out to dinner, imagine what's possible with one phone call when we are talking about your future. So I hope that you'll join me in creating the retirement of your dreams together. And then you leave.
Boom. What a story. See, look at you, the storyteller. See, there's a level of performance in your storytelling because, oh, hold on one second. That's a story of my husband trying to call me. I don't know if you heard that. There's a level of storytelling there's a level of performance to your storytelling because you really are present in the moment and you take your audience on a journey. It's beautiful.
There's a lot of fun in that magic. And it's one of the things that I do, just listening to my audience. And I try to be a performance and a reflection of what their story could be, which in a lot of ways gets them 80% of the way. They see how it could be, and it locks the story in a certain context that I feel like hopefully you can skip some of the line or the hard work of having to learn these frameworks over and over and practice them, and sometimes be good and sometimes be bad.
Yeah,
But
totally. Yeah. No, it's beautiful. It's great to watch, and obviously you're a master at what you do. For those that are just learning how to storytell or to capture their stories, what are those first steps or what's one thing that somebody can do or start off by doing if they're brand new to storytelling?
The most important thing is to focus on your client and not yourself. A lot of people think storytelling is just talking about yourself, but the opposite is true. It actually allows you to talk about yourself and be a mirror to your client. And so you must know your client well. You must understand them deeply, and you have to have a lot of conversations. If you're a coach, you're so good at a coach and you've coached so much that now you can anticipate them, how they're thinking, like a chess player does. And that's what having this, but you've got to start with just thinking about their problems first. How did they describe their problems? How do they see what their situation is like? And you want to start telling stories that reflect that. And if you can start to listen, this will develop your listening, because one of the biggest problems is that people just have like 10,000 ideas and they just all start to fall out all at the same time. But that means you're not listening. You're trying to prove yourself to them. You want to show you're calling up all of your knowledge. But if you're present and thinking like, well, what is their real problem here? What is their objection? Why do they believe that something like this couldn't work for them? And if you start to tune into that then and have stories prepared, you're going to be able to be more present with them, and you're going to have stories that are strategic, that are natural, and that are authentic.
Love that. So good. Such great advice. Great tip. Really good tip. Uh, Kyle, this has been awesome to hear you talk about stories. You're clearly a master at what you do. If there's anyone in the audience that's listening and wants to get in touch with you and find out more about what you do and work on their stories, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, for anybody on the podcast, anybody who is interested, I would love to connect with you for 30 minutes and just talk about what the possibilities could be if you develop the talk using these methods, if you develop these stories. So if you're interested, I will leave a link to just have a coffee introductory chat, and anybody that comes from this podcast, yeah, I'll definitely follow back up with you. But I'd love to
Oh,
talk about
awesome.
the possibilities.
Sounds
So
good.
yeah,
Wonderful.
I'll leave the link and in the show notes. You've got to go to the show
We
notes.
will pop it
I
in the
have a
show
podcast,
notes. Yep.
and I know that people need to go to those show notes
Yep.
and
It's
leave a review. I'm going to leave a
and
review right after this podcast.
oh, thank you. It is. It's all about the show notes. That's where all the goodness is. So we will pop that in our show notes and make sure and check out Kyle. Kyle, thank you so much. It's been such a joy to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
These were next level questions, Katherine. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.